They were told Americans would strip them naked and humiliate them. That capture meant torture, starvation, and degradation. But when 247 German women stepped off the transport trucks at Camp Ruston, Louisiana in September 1945, what broke them wasn't cruelty. It was a bar of soap. These women hadn't bathed properly in 6 months. Their hair was matted with dirt and lice. Their skin was covered in grime so thick you couldn't see their original color. They smelled of sweat, fear, and decay. They expected death. Instead, they got hot water. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of incredible historical moments like this, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us bring you more amazing true stories from World War II. What happened next would change everything they believed about their enemy, their country, and themselves. September in Louisiana is brutal. The heat hits you like a wall. The humidity makes your clothes stick to your skin within minutes. The air is thick, heavy, hard to breathe. For women who had spent the last 6 months in cold German camps and then cramped ship holds, the Louisiana heat was shocking. The trucks rumbled through the camp gates, kicking up red dust that coated everything. Through the canvas covers, the women caught glimpses of their new prison. Wooden barracks stretched in neat rows. American soldiers stood at attention. Guard towers loomed against the bright blue sky. Everything was organized, clean, and terrifyingly foreign. These weren't soldiers. They were women who had worked for the German military, secretaries, nurses, radio operators, clerks. Some were young, barely 20 years old. Others were in their 30s and 40s. They came from all over Germany. Hamburg, Berlin, Munich. Small villages with names Americans couldn't pronounce. Their clothes were falling apart. Gray-green uniforms that had once been crisp and professional were now torn, stained, and ragged. Buttons were missing. Hems were frayed. Some women had wrapped cloth around their feet because their boots had worn through. Others clutched small bags containing everything they owned in the world. But it was their faces that told the real story. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under their eyes, skin that looked gray and lifeless, hair that hung in greasy clumps. These were women who had survived 6 months without proper food, without medical care, and without the ability to truly wash themselves. The smell hit them first when they climbed down from the trucks. Not the smell of death or rot that they expected. It was the smell of food. Real food. Bread baking somewhere. Meat cooking. Coffee brewing. For women who had lived on watery soup and stale bread for months, the smell was almost painful. It made their stomachs clench with hunger so intense it hurt. Then came the sounds. American voices barking orders, but not the way they had imagined. The tone was firm but not cruel. Efficient but not brutal. They heard other voices too. German voices from women who had arrived earlier. Some were laughing. Actually laughing. How was that possible? The heat wrapped around them like a blanket. After months of cold, freezing German winters, cold ship holds, cold fear, the warmth should have been welcome. But it was too much. Combined with their exhaustion and fear, several women swayed on their feet. One collapsed. American medics rushed forward to help her. That was the first shock. They helped her. They didn't kick her or leave her lying in the dirt. The visual contrast was impossible to ignore. The Americans looked healthy, well-fed, clean. Their uniforms were pressed, their boots shined, they stood straight and confident. The German women, by comparison, looked like ghosts. Thin, dirty, broken. The difference between them felt like the difference between life and death. Maria, a 23-year-old former secretary from Berlin, stood frozen as she took it all in. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her mouth was dry. Her hands trembled. She had been preparing herself for this moment for weeks. Preparing to be beaten, to be starved, to be humiliated. The Nazi propaganda had been clear. American soldiers were monsters who would show no mercy to German women. Next to her, an older woman named Greta whispered, "This is wrong. This is all wrong." She wasn't talking about cruelty. She was talking about the kindness, the organization, the fact that they were still alive. They had been told to expect the worst, but this didn't look like the worst. This looked disturbingly normal. A young nurse named Elizabeth started crying, not from fear but from confusion. She had spent the last 6 months imagining her death. She had made peace with it. She had written letters to her family saying goodbye. But now, standing in this Louisiana camp, watching American soldiers hand out water bottles to exhausted prisoners, she didn't know what to think. They were lined up and counted. Names were checked against lists on clipboards. Tags with numbers were handed out. Everything was documented, recorded, organized. It felt more like checking into a hotel than being processed as prisoners of war. That cognitive dissonance, the gap between what they expected and what they were experiencing, was almost worse than cruelty would have been. It forced them to question everything they thought they knew. After the initial processing, an American officer stood before them. A German-speaking translator stood beside him. The officer's face was serious but not angry. He explained that they would be taken to the delousing station. They would be given medical examinations. They would receive clean clothes. The word delousing sent a wave of panic through the group. In Nazi Germany, delousing had been a euphemism for murder. Gas chambers were disguised as shower rooms. The women looked at each other with wide, terrified eyes. This was it. This was where the cruelty would begin. Maria felt her legs go weak. Her vision blurred. She tried to breathe but couldn't get enough air. Next to her, Greta grabbed her hand and squeezed it hard. "Stay strong," Greta whispered. "Whatever happens, we face it together." But some women didn't wait. 2 tried to run. American soldiers caught them easily, but they didn't hurt them. They held them gently and called for a medic. The medic spoke German. She was a German-American woman from Wisconsin. She knelt down beside the panicking women and spoke softly. "You're safe. I promise you're safe. We're just going to help you get clean. That's all. Just clean." The women didn't believe her. How could they? But they had no choice. They were prisoners. So they formed a line and began walking toward a long, low building with steam rising from its roof. Every step toward that building felt like walking to an execution. The women moved slowly, reluctantly. Some were praying. Others were silent, their faces blank with resignation. A few were crying quietly. Maria counted her steps. 1, 2, 3. If she focused on counting, she didn't have to think about what might be waiting inside. The building had a door at each end. 1 entrance, 1 exit. Like a processing plant. Like the facilities they had heard whispered about in Germany. The ones where people went in but didn't come out. Elizabeth clutched her small bag tighter. Inside was a photograph of her mother and a letter she had never sent. She wanted to have something of home with her when she died. They reached the door. An American nurse stood there with a clipboard. She was smiling. Actually smiling. She said something in English that the translator repeated in German. "Welcome. Please come inside and we'll get you fixed up." Fixed up. What did that mean? Fixed for what? The first woman stepped inside. The door closed behind her. The others waited, hearts pounding. Seconds felt like hours. Then the door opened again, and the woman was led through to another room. She was alive. She hadn't screamed. She looked confused but not hurt. One by one they entered. When it was Maria's turn, she forced herself to step forward. The nurse guided her gently by the arm. "Don't worry, honey," the nurse said in English. Maria didn't understand the words, but the tone was kind. That made it worse. Kindness before cruelty was more painful than cruelty alone. The first room was for medical inspection. A female American doctor checked each woman for injuries, diseases, and infestations. She was gentle. She explained everything she was doing through the translator. She looked in their mouths, checked their skin, listened to their hearts and lungs. When she found lice, and she found them on nearly every woman, she didn't recoil in disgust. She simply made notes on her chart. Maria stood there, naked and shivering despite the heat, as the doctor examined her. She waited for the judgment, the disgust, the punishment. Instead, the doctor said something in English. The translator spoke. "She says you have malnutrition and several vitamin deficiencies. She's going to make sure you get extra food to help you recover. She also says you're very brave." "It's brave?" Maria almost laughed. There was nothing brave about being captured and processed like cattle, but she saw the doctor's face. She was sincere. She meant it. Maria didn't know how to process that information, so she just nodded and moved on to the next room. The next room was large and tiled. Shower heads lined the walls. Steam filled the air. The smell of soap and disinfectant was strong. This was it. This was the room. Maria's breath came in short gasps. Her vision narrowed. She was going to die here. She was sure of it. But instead of gas, water came from the shower heads. Hot water, not scalding, not cold, just hot. And with the water came something else. Hope. An American nurse handed Maria a bar of soap. It was white, clean, and smelled like flowers. Lavender, maybe, or roses. Maria couldn't remember the last time she had seen real soap. For months they had tried to wash with cold water and sand. Sometimes nothing at all. This soap felt heavy in her hand. Solid. Real. The nurse gestured toward the showers and said something encouraging. Maria stepped under the water. The heat hit her skin. For a moment it almost hurt. Her body had forgotten what warmth felt like. Then the sensation changed. The hot water soaked into her skin, her hair, her bones. 6 months of dirt began to wash away. Maria started to cry. She couldn't help it. The tears came hot and fast, mixing with the water streaming down her face. She lathered the soap and scrubbed her skin. The water at her feet turned gray, then brown, then black with the dirt coming off her body. She washed her hair, working the soap through the matted tangles. Lice and grime washed down the drain. Around her, other women were having the same experience. Some were crying silently. Others were scrubbing their skin so hard it turned red. A few were laughing, high-pitched, almost hysterical laughter that came from disbelief and relief. Greta stood under her shower with her eyes closed, letting the water pour over her face like a baptism. Elizabeth, the young nurse, sank to her knees in the shower and sobbed. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't going to die. Not today. Not here. The hot water was real. The soap was real. This wasn't torture. It was mercy. And mercy was harder to understand than cruelty. They stayed in the showers longer than they needed to. The nurses didn't rush them. When they finally stepped out, towels were waiting. Big, white, clean towels. Not rough rags or torn blankets, but real towels. Maria wrapped herself in one and felt its softness against her clean skin. It was the first gentle thing that had touched her body in 6 months. In the next room, clean clothes waited. Not new clothes, they were clearly used, probably donated, but they were clean, mended, and folded neatly. There were dresses, skirts, blouses, even underwear and socks. The women were told to pick items that fit. Maria chose a simple blue dress and white blouse. They smelled like soap and sunshine, like they had been dried outside on a clothesline. She put them on slowly, her hands still shaking. The fabric felt soft against her clean skin. She looked down at herself and barely recognized her own body. For 6 months she had been a prisoner, an enemy, a number. She had worn the same dirty uniform until it was part of her skin. Now, dressed in clean clothes, she felt human again. Not quite herself, she didn't know who that was anymore, but human. They were given mirrors, small handheld mirrors. Some women were afraid to look. Others looked and didn't recognize themselves. Maria stared at her reflection. Her skin was pale but clean. Her hair, still wet, hung in clean strands. The dark circles under her eyes were still there, but her face looked different. Younger, maybe, or just less dead. Greta looked in the mirror and started to laugh. Real laughter this time, not hysterical. "I look almost human," she said. "I forgot what that felt like." Other women nodded. They understood. Being clean wasn't just about removing dirt. It was about reclaiming dignity they thought they had lost forever. After the delousing station, the women were led to the mess hall. It was a long building with tables and benches. American soldiers ate in one section. The German prisoners would eat in another. But the food came from the same kitchen. That fact alone was astonishing. Maria stood in line with a tray. She watched the American soldiers ahead of her receive their food. Mashed potatoes with butter. Chicken that was actually chicken, not mystery meat. Green beans, fresh bread, a cup of coffee, and dessert, apple pie. When it was her turn, she received the same portions, the exact same food the American soldiers were eating. She sat down at a table with Greta, Elizabeth, and several other women. They stared at their plates in silence. The food was still steaming. The smell made Maria's stomach growl so loudly the others heard it. But no one laughed. They were all feeling the same thing. Hunger mixed with disbelief, mixed with fear that this was somehow a trick. Greta picked up her fork and took a bite of mashed potatoes. Her eyes closed. She chewed slowly, as if trying to memorize the taste. Then she started crying again. "Real butter," she whispered. "There's real butter in this." That broke the dam. Everyone started eating. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite. Others ate quickly, afraid the food would disappear. Maria cut a piece of chicken and put it in her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Salt, fat, actual flavor. She had forgotten food could taste like this. For months, everything had tasted like nothing. Gray. Bland. Barely enough to keep you alive. Elizabeth ate her entire meal and then stared at the apple pie on her plate. She poked it with her fork. The crust was golden and flaky. The apples inside were soft and sweet. She took a bite and immediately thought of her mother. Before the war, her mother used to make apple pie on Sundays. The memory was so strong it hurt. She put down her fork because she couldn't eat through her tears. An American soldier noticed. He walked over with a translator. "Is something wrong with the food?" he asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "No," she said through the translator. "It's perfect. That's the problem. It's too perfect." The soldier didn't understand, but he nodded and walked away. How could she explain that kindness hurt worse than cruelty? That every good thing they received made their suffering at home more real? After the meal, they were shown to their barracks. The building was simple but clean. Rows of bunk beds lined the walls. Each bed had a mattress, sheets, a pillow, and 2 blankets. There was a small locker for personal belongings. Windows let in natural light. The floor was swept. Everything smelled clean. Maria chose a bottom bunk near the window. She sat on the edge and bounced slightly, testing the mattress. It was thin but soft. Softer than the floor she had slept on for months. Softer than the wooden boards on the ship. She lay down and felt her body sink into the mattress. Her muscles, which had been tense for so long she forgot what relaxation felt like, began to release. Greta climbed into the bunk above her. "This is wrong," she said again. "This is all wrong." But this time her voice wasn't angry or scared. It was sad. "We're the enemy. We should be treated like enemies. Why are they doing this? No one had an answer. They lay in their bunks, clean and fed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, they could hear American voices, the sound of engines, normal camp life continuing. Inside, there was only confused silence. That night, Maria couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She kept thinking about the soap, the way it had felt in her hand, the smell of flowers, the hot water washing away months of filth. It was such a simple thing, but it had broken something inside her. She had spent months building walls to protect herself, walls made of anger, fear, and hatred. The soap had slipped right through those walls. Days turned into a routine. Each morning a bell rang at 6 a.m. The women woke, made their beds, and went to breakfast. Oatmeal, toast, eggs if available, coffee or milk. Then came work assignments. Some women worked in the laundry, others in the kitchen or garden, some cleaned the camp buildings or did mending and repairs. The work wasn't hard, not compared to what they had done in Germany, and they were paid. Not much, but enough to buy items from the canteen. Chocolate bars, soap, toothpaste, cigarettes, writing paper, and envelopes. The idea that prisoners could buy chocolate was insane. But it was real. Lunch was at noon. Soup, sandwiches, fruit, then more work until dinner at 6 p.m. After dinner, they had free time. Some women wrote letters, others played cards or read books from the camp library. A few attended English classes taught by German-American volunteers. The Americans even allowed them to have radios and listen to music. Every week they could shower again. Not just a quick rinse, but a real shower with hot water and soap. That weekly shower became the highlight of their week. Maria started keeping track of the days by counting showers. 1 shower ago, she was new. 2 showers ago, she was still expecting cruelty. 3 showers ago, she stopped flinching when American soldiers walked by. The first letter Maria received from her family came 3 weeks after her arrival. The envelope was thin and worn. The paper inside was rough. Her mother's handwriting was shaky. Maria sat on her bunk and read it slowly. Her mother wrote about the cold, about how they burned furniture for heat because there was no coal, about standing in line for hours to get a ration of bread so small it barely fed 1 person, let alone 3, about her younger sister who was sick but they couldn't get medicine, about neighbors who had died from starvation or cold or simply giving up. Maria read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it under her pillow. That night at dinner, she stared at her plate. Pork chops, boiled potatoes, carrots, bread, and chocolate pudding for dessert. She thought about her mother eating nothing, her sister being sick, her neighbors dying. She picked up the pork chop and took a bite. It was delicious. She hated herself for enjoying it. She hated herself more for being glad she was here and not there. The guilt was overwhelming. She was safe, fed, and clean while her family suffered. What kind of person did that make her? Greta noticed Maria's distress. "You got a letter," she said. It wasn't a question. Everyone who got letters from Germany had the same look afterward. "My family is starving," Maria said quietly. "And I'm eating pork chops." Greta nodded. "Mine too. My husband wrote that they're living on turnip soup, 1 meal a day, and here I am getting 3 meals, plus snacks if we want them. It doesn't make sense." Elizabeth joined the conversation. "I keep gaining weight," she said. "I can feel it. My clothes fit tighter. My face doesn't look so thin anymore. I should be happy about that. But instead I feel guilty, like I'm betraying my family by being healthy." Other women nodded. They all felt it, the impossible contradiction of their situation. They were prisoners of war, but they were being treated better than their own country had treated them. The enemy was feeding them while their homeland starved. Nothing made sense anymore. For years, the Nazi propaganda machine had told them specific things about Americans. They were told Americans were brutal, uncivilized, money-obsessed monsters who would show no mercy. They were told American soldiers would torture and humiliate German prisoners. They were told capture meant death. But none of that was true. Maria struggled with this reality every day. She had believed the propaganda. She had trusted her leaders. She had thought she knew what to expect. Being wrong about that meant she might be wrong about other things too, and that thought terrified her. One afternoon, she sat in the common area and tried to work it out. If the propaganda about Americans was a lie, what else was a lie? The stories about German superiority? The promises of victory? The reasons for the war? If one part of the foundation was false, the whole structure might be false. Elizabeth approached her with a question. "Maria, can I ask you something?" Maria nodded. Elizabeth sat down and spoke quietly. Do you think we were the bad guys?" The question hung in the air between them. Dangerous. Treasonous. True. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "I don't know what to think anymore. We were told we were fighting for our country's survival, that we were defending our way of life. But look at us. The enemy is treating us better than our own country did. They're feeding us, keeping us clean, giving us medical care. If we were right and they were wrong, why would they do that? Elizabeth nodded slowly. My fiancé was killed on the Eastern Front. I was told he died a hero defending the fatherland. But what if he just died? What if there was no glory, no honor, no purpose? What if he died for nothing? She started crying. Maria put her arm around her shoulders. I don't have answers, Maria said. All I know is that everything we were told about our enemies was wrong. That has to mean something, but I'm afraid to figure out what it means. There was an American guard named Private Johnson. He was young, maybe 22 or 23. He had a friendly face and was always chewing gum. Maria saw him every day when she walked to her work assignment in the laundry. At first, she avoided looking at him. He was the enemy, a guard, someone to fear. But he never acted threatening. He would nod good morning. Sometimes he would hold the door open for the women. Once, he picked up a dropped letter and handed it back to an elderly woman with a smile. One day, as Maria walked past, Private Johnson called out to her, Hey, miss. She stopped, her heart racing. What did he want? Was she in trouble? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stick of chewing gum. He held it out to her through the fence. Maria stared at it. It was just gum. Wrigley's spearmint. Nothing special. But the gesture was everything. He was sharing something with her. Not because he had to. Not because it was his job. But because he was a person and she was a person and people share things. She took the gum with shaking hands. Thank you, she said in broken English. He smiled and gave her a thumbs up. You're welcome, he said slowly and clearly. Then he went back to his post. Maria unwrapped the gum and put it in her mouth. The spearmint flavor was cool and refreshing. She chewed slowly as she walked to the laundry. That piece of gum broke something else inside her. If Private Johnson could see her as a person, if he could share something as simple as gum, then maybe he wasn't a monster. And if he wasn't a monster, then none of them were monsters. And if the Americans weren't monsters, then everything she had been taught was wrong. The longer they stayed in the camp, the more they understood about American life. Some women were allowed to work outside the camp under supervision. They picked cotton in nearby fields, worked in canneries, or helped at local farms. These work details showed them an America they never imagined existed. Maria was assigned to help at a local farm. The farmer was an older man with weathered hands and a kind face. He and his wife treated the German workers with respect. They provided water breaks in the shade. They served lunch, sandwiches, lemonade, cookies. At the end of the day, the farmer's wife pressed a jar of homemade jam into Maria's hands. For you, she said through gestures since they didn't share a language. That night, Maria shared the jam with her barrack mates. They spread it on bread from the mess hall and ate it slowly. The jam was sweet and tasted like strawberries in summer. Greta said what they were all thinking. These people have so much. Their country wasn't bombed. Their families aren't starving. They won the war and they're still kind to us. How is that possible? Elizabeth had another work detail at a cannery in town. She told the others about what she saw there. The Americans have everything, she said. The stores are full of food. The houses are intact. Children play in the streets. They're not hungry or scared. They just live. Normal lives. While we were told America was weak and decadent and doomed, they were living in abundance. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Germany was in ruins, cities destroyed, people starving. The economy collapsed. America was intact, prosperous, powerful. The nation they had been told was their inferior enemy had crushed them completely, and now having won, they were showing mercy. This is how you win, Greta said one evening. You don't just defeat your enemy with weapons, you defeat them with kindness. You show them their propaganda was wrong. You feed them and clean them and treat them like humans. That's more powerful than any bullet. One night, unable to sleep, Maria wrote in a small notebook she had bought from the canteen. She tried to work through the confusion in her mind by putting it on paper. She wrote, We were told we were superior, that Germans were the master race, that other people were beneath us. But if that was true, why did we lose? Why are we the ones in prison camps while they walk free? Why are they feeding us while our families starve? She continued, And more than that, if we were so superior, why did we need to be told we were superior? Why did we need propaganda and lies to make us feel special? The Americans don't seem to think they're better than everyone else. They just are better, stronger, richer, kinder. They don't need to tell themselves they're the master race because they don't believe in master races. They just believe in being decent. The next page read, I have value because I am human. Not because I am German, not because of my blood or my heritage or my nation, just because I am human. The Americans seem to understand this. They treat us like we have worth even though we were their enemy. They give us dignity even though they don't have to. Maybe that's what makes them strong. Not cruelty or power, but the simple belief that all people deserve basic decency. She closed the notebook and stared at it. These thoughts were dangerous, revolutionary. If any Nazi official read them, she would be executed for treason. But they were also true. She knew they were true because she had lived them. She had been shown dignity by people who had every right to be cruel to her. 3 months after arriving at Camp Ruston, Maria stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She had just taken her weekly shower. Her hair was clean and had grown longer. Her face had filled out. She had gained weight, probably 15 or 20 pounds. Her skin had color again. She looked healthy. She looked alive. She stared at her reflection and had a moment of complete clarity. This person looking back at her was not the same person who had arrived 3 months ago. That person had been broken, defeated, empty. This person was recovering, healing, changing. But the change wasn't just physical. Maria realized she had been transformed in a deeper way. Her enemy had restored her humanity. They had given her back her dignity. They had shown her that she had value not because of her nationality or her politics or her allegiance, but simply because she was human. The soap, the hot water, the clean clothes, the food, the medical care, the basic respect. These simple things had done what violence never could. They had broken through her indoctrination and shown her the truth. The truth that there were no master races or inferior peoples, just people, all deserving of basic dignity. She started crying. Not from sadness or joy, but from the overwhelming weight of understanding. Her entire worldview had collapsed and rebuilt itself around one simple principle. Kindness matters. Dignity matters. Seeing other people as human beings matters more than any ideology or propaganda or nationalistic pride. Greta found her there, crying in front of the mirror. "What's wrong?" she asked. Maria shook her head. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wrong. I don't know anymore." She looked at Greta. "We were so sure. We believed everything they told us. We thought we knew who we were and who the enemy was. But we were wrong about everything." Greta nodded. She understood. They all understood. They had all been through the same transformation. The soap had washed away more than dirt. It had washed away lies. That night, the women in Maria's barracks stayed up late talking. They had been avoiding these conversations, afraid of where they might lead, but the truth could no longer be avoided. "We lost the war," Elizabeth said, "but I'm glad we did. If Germany had won, we would still believe the lies. We would never know that what we were taught was wrong. Losing the war saved us from ourselves." Several women nodded in agreement. An older woman named Helga spoke up. "My son died fighting in Russia. I was told he died a hero, but now I think he died for nothing. He died defending a lie. That's worse than just dying. He was a good boy. He deserved better than to die for a regime that lied to us about everything." She was crying. Others joined her. "What do we do now?" someone asked. "What do we believe in if everything we believed before was wrong?" Maria thought about this. "We believe in what's real," she said finally. "Kindness is real. Dignity is real. The soap was real. The hot water was real. The fact that our enemy treated us like human beings when they didn't have to, that's real. We build from there." The conversation continued into the night. They talked about their families back home, about the Germany they would return to, about how they would live with the knowledge of what their country had done and what they had believed. There were no easy answers, but there was honesty. And honesty, they realized, was the first step toward healing. As 1946 began, rumors of repatriation spread through the camp. The war had been over for months. Germany was being rebuilt under Allied occupation. Eventually, the prisoners would be sent home. This should have been good news. But many of the women were terrified. Maria thought about returning to Berlin. What would she find there? Ruins, starvation, her family struggling to survive. And she would arrive healthy, well-fed, carrying the weight of knowing that her enemy had treated her better than her own country ever had. How could she explain that? How could she tell her mother that she had eaten 3 meals a day while her family starved? More than that, how could she go back to living in a society that still believed the lies? Many Germans she knew would refuse to accept the truth. They would cling to the propaganda because accepting the truth meant accepting that they had been wrong about everything. Maria didn't know if she could live among people who still believed in the things she now knew were false. "I don't want to go back," Elizabeth admitted one day. "I know that sounds terrible. I should want to see my family. But I'm afraid of what I'll find. I'm afraid of becoming that person again, the person who believed the lies." Other women nodded. They felt the same way. Greta put it more bluntly. "We've been shown what human decency looks like. We've experienced a society that values all people, not just their own. How do we go back to a place that doesn't understand that? How do we unlearn what we've learned here?" When the repatriation orders finally came, Maria took one last shower at Camp Ruston. She stood under the hot water and thought about everything that had happened since that first shower 6 months ago. That first shower had been terrifying and transformative. She had entered expecting death and received dignity instead. She had washed away not just dirt, but the foundation of her worldview. This last shower was different. She was washing away the safety and security of captivity and preparing to face the harsh reality of post-war Germany. She washed her hair carefully, savoring the feeling of hot water and soap. She knew that luxuries like this might not be available in Germany for years. She knew she would have to get used to being dirty again, to being hungry again, to being afraid again. But she also knew that she carried something with her that couldn't be taken away. The knowledge that humanity could persist even in the darkest times. When she stepped out of the shower, Greta was waiting. They hugged, both crying. "We survived," Greta said. "Not just the war, not just captivity. We survived our own ignorance. We're going home as different people." Maria nodded. "I just hope that's enough. I just hope—" The day they left Camp Rustin, the women lined up one last time. American soldiers checked their names against lists. They were given travel documents, a small amount of money, and care packages with food and basic supplies. Some of the guards they had come to know came to say goodbye. Private Johnson, the guard who had shared gum with Maria, found her in the line. He held out his hand for a handshake. Maria took it. "Good luck," he said in English. "Thank you," she replied in English, one of the phrases she had learned. "Thank you for everything." He smiled. "You're a good person. Don't forget that. Don't let anyone tell you different." She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the meaning. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. On the ship back to Germany, Maria stood on deck watching America disappear behind her. She thought about everything she was leaving behind, the safety, the food, the cleanliness, the kindness. But she also thought about what she was taking with her, a new understanding of humanity, dignity, and the power of simple decency. She promised herself that she would tell the truth, no matter how hard it was, no matter who didn't want to hear it. She would tell her family what happened. She would explain that their enemy had shown more humanity than their own leaders. She would bear witness to the fact that kindness had defeated hatred in her heart. Years later, Maria would tell her daughter about the soap, about standing in that shower room, terrified and dirty, expecting death, about the hot water and the smell of flowers, about how a simple bar of soap had changed her life. "Remember this," she told her daughter. "The greatest weapons are not guns or bombs. They are kindness, dignity, and the courage to see your enemy as human. That's how you truly win." And so the soap became a symbol, not just of cleanliness, but of transformation. Those 247 German women arrived at Camp Rustin expecting cruelty and received dignity instead. They came prepared to die and were taught to live again. A simple bar of soap and hot water broke through years of propaganda and showed them a truth more powerful than any lie, that all people deserve basic human decency, regardless of which side of a war they fought on. For Maria and the others, that first bath wasn't just about washing away 6 months of dirt. It was about washing away hatred, about cleaning off the lies they had been told and starting fresh. The hot water couldn't fix everything. It couldn't bring back the dead. It couldn't rebuild destroyed cities. It couldn't erase the horrors of the war. But it could do one thing. It could remind broken people that they were still human, that they still had worth, that even in the aftermath of humanity's darkest chapter, there was still room for mercy, kindness, and hope. The women who experienced this never forgot it. They carried that memory with them for the rest of their lives. They told their children and grandchildren. Some wrote it down in diaries and letters that have survived to this day. Their story is a reminder that how we treat our enemies says more about us than it does about them. As Maria wrote in her journal years later, "They could have treated us like animals. Many would have said we deserved it. But instead they gave us soap and hot water. They gave us back our humanity. I learned more about strength from that kindness than I ever learned from all the propaganda about power and dominance. Real strength is choosing mercy when you have the power to choose cruelty." If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share incredible true stories from World War II that reveal the complexity of human nature and the unexpected moments of humanity even in the darkest times. These stories matter because they remind us that we always have a choice in how we treat others, even our enemies. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon is a bar of soap and the willingness to see your enemy as human.